Well, hello everyone. It's Brother Donnie. Hope you're doing well this evening. You see me at the bottom of your screen over here. Hope everything's going good for everybody. I'd like to welcome you in this evening to our new titled study on great men and women of faith. Now, let me give you my philosophy why I renamed this from Heroes of the Faith. Well, I got to thinking and I heard a sermon by this fella, and it kind of convicted me a little bit. And the premise for the sermon was that Jesus is really the only hero that there is. And that kind of struck me, and I thought, well, he's right, really, because we're all fallen men, and Christ was not fallen. So I've renamed our study Great Men and Women of the Faith. So hope y'all understand that. With that said, let's get right into it. Hello there, Jim and Leanna. First in the house. Hello, Warren. Good to see you. Hey, Duke. God bless you. Welcome on in. Hope you're doing well, Mr. Duke, Warren, and Jim and Leanna. Welcome and thank you for being here. And we're going to go ahead and get started. And we are on the final part this evening of Roger Williams. And just to bring you back up to speed now, Roger Williams and his wife left England. He was a pastor. He left England. He believed that the church was corrupted in England. So he left England, came to America. Last week, we talked about how he was having some difficulties with some of the officials. Well, tonight we're going to pick up the rest of the story. The year 1633. The area is the Massachusetts Bay, not too terribly far from where Brother Jim is. The Massachusetts Bay authorities were not pleased at Williams' return. He had come back to Salem. I don't know if you remember that. In December 1633, they summoned him to appear before the General Court in Boston. Hello, Mary Catherine. To defend his tract attacking the king and the charter. And if you'll remember now, what he said was that the King of England, he drew a very sharp line about the king being the head of the church, etc. And this really set some of the people off. August 1634, Williams became acting pastor of the Salem Church, the Reverend Skelton having died. And in March 1635, he was again ordered to appear before the General Court, and he was summoned yet again for the court's July term to answer for erroneous and dangerous opinions. Now, what was taking place here is that Roger held some pretty significant views on slavery, on Indians, on religious liberty, on having a king as the king in England. And so he had some at the time very, very controversial views. So the court finally ordered that he may be removed from his church position. The latest controversy welled up as the town of Salem had petitioned the General Court to annex some land on Marblehead. Now I want you to pay attention to what happens here. The court refused to consider the request unless the church in Salem removed Williams. The church felt that this order violated their independence and sent a letter of protest. However, to the other churches in the area. However, the letter was not read publicly in those churches, and the General Court refused to seat the delegates from Salem at the next session. Support, here it is, for Williams began to wane under pressure, and he withdrew from the church and began a meeting with a few mostly devoted followers in his home. So what had taken place here is that he had taken stands against these courts. He'd taken stands in favor of the Indians, in favor of separation of church and state. And the court at the time, now you gotta understand something here. This is not officially yet the United States of America. These are provincials of England. They are places, they are territories, if you will, of England still. So the courts were set up with an English structure at this time. Now that's going to be changing. And Roger Williams had a huge impact on that. Finally, in October 1635, the General Court tried Williams and convicted him of sedition and heresy. Now, it's interesting to me, folks, that in the Bible days, most of the apostles that were tried by the courts, if you will, were convicted of the same type of sedation or rebellion against the authority. They declared that he was spreading diverse, new, and dangerous opinions in order that he be banished. The execution of the order was delayed because William was ill and winter was approaching, so he was allowed to stay temporarily if he ceased publicly teaching his opinions. He did not comply with this demand, and the sheriff came in 1636, only to discover that he had slipped away 3 days earlier during a blizzard. Now, listen to this. He traveled 55 miles through the deep snow from Salem to Raynham, Massachusetts, where the local Wanapaugas offered him shelter at their winter camp. Sachem Mozat hosted Williams there for 3 months in the spring. Now, the bottom picture here is a statue of Mozat. He is the Indian chieftain that led Williams, that let him stay in his area. Now, this is where part of the formulation of Rhode Island in that area started to take place. In the spring of 1636, Williams and a number of others from Salem began a new settlement on the land which he had brought from the Massot in Rumford, Rhode Island. After settling, however, authorities of Plymouth colony asserted that Williams and his followers were within their land grant and expressed concern that his presence might anger the leaders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. You got to remember now, Williams was a rebel. He was a rebel. Accordingly, Williams, accompanied by Thomas Angle, crossed the Seekonk River in search of a new location suitable for the settlement. And upon reaching the shore, Williams and Angle were met by the indigenous Narragansett people, who greeted them with these words, "What cheer? Hello, friend." The settlers then continued eastward along the Providence River, where they encountered a cove and freshwater spring. Finding the area suitable for a settlement, Williams acquired the tract from Sakems and Mantomay. Here, Williams and his followers established a new permanent settlement, one which you have heard of, under the belief that divine providence had brought them there, and the settlers named the settlement Providence, which of course is Providence, Rhode Island. And so Williams wanted his settlement, listen, to be a haven for those distressed for conscience sake. And it soon attracted a collection of dissenters and other like-minded peoples. From the beginning, a majority of vote of the heads of household governed the new settlement, but only in civil things. You got to remember now, the church in England was still under the mindset that the king, the government, was intermingled, so to speak, in some things of the church. Newcomers could be admitted to full citizenship by majority vote. It also needs to be pointed out that some of the Presbyterians believed in this same type of a secular government, which could have a bearing on church life. And we can explain that later on. In 1637, a Newtown Agreement again restricted the government to civil things. In 1640, 39 free men Men who had full citizenships and voting rights signed another agreement that declared their determination still to hold forth liberty of conscience. Thus, William founded the first place in modern history where citizenship and religion were separate, providing religious liberty and separation of church and state. This was combined with the principle of majoritarian democracy. And in November 1637, the General Court of Massachusetts disarmed, disenfrocked, and forced into exile some of the antinomians, including followers of Anne Hutchinson, and John Clark was among them. And he learned from Williams. Now, John Clark, we'll talk about him in a moment, that Rhode Island might be purchased from the Nagarsettes. Williams helped him to make the purchase along with William Coddington, and they established the settlement of Portsmouth in the spring of 1638, and then the settlement of Newport. So, Providence, Portsmouth, Newport. You may have heard of all these towns. They are certainly thriving in a distance today. Now, in 1638, Williams and about 12 others were baptized and formed a congregation. And today, Williams's congregation is recognized as the first Baptist church in America, and it is in Providence, Rhode Island. Now, the distinctives of that was that it was founded with the thought process, and you see the different pictures here, and then this is a monument of Roger Williams. The focus there would have been on congregational polity. Congregational has a say in what would be going on. You could have elders or leaders in the church, but the congregation would have a say. So what's his legacy here? How did he impact? Well, he impacted the founding fathers greatly. Williams' defense of the Native Americans, his accusations that Puritans had reproduced the evils of the Anglican Church, and his insistence that England pay the Native Americans for their land all put him at the center of many political debates during his life. He was considered an important historical figure of religious liberty at the time of American independence, and he was a key influence on the thinking of the founding fathers. Williams, and I found this to be very interesting, Williams considered the state sponsor of religious belief or practice forced worship, declaring forced worship stinks in God's nostrils. He also believed Constantine the Great to be worse enemy to Christianity than Nero, because the subsequent state involvement in religious matters corrupted Christianity. Now, let me say on this point here, Calvin had a similar government in Geneva. And what Williams was bringing forth here was forced worship, forced Christianity on people, and the government, in effect, orchestrating the will of the church on the public. Now, I disagree with that because of this. A couple of things. Number one, human hearts cannot be legal standards will not force human hearts to turn to Christ. Won't happen. All legal standards does is pat down and restrain sin. That's all it does, right? So I don't agree in what is called a modern notion of what they call theonomy, or God being over the government. Now in the Old Testament, there was a theocratic system. But in our age of grace, we can't say God, and of course he's ultimately over government, he's over everything. But men has to turn hearts to Jesus Christ, separate from government forcing them to do so. So Williams believed that, and he put forth that. And he might have taken it a little extreme here. But he says, in religious matters, corrupted Christianity and led to the death of the first Christian church and the first Christian communities. And he's right about this. The early church suffered greatly. In one way, it was blessed by Constantine coming. He had he had the vision He became what they called saved, and he said, well, now the whole Roman Empire Christianity is going to be accepted. On one hand, he helped it, but on the other hand, he hurt it dearly, because that's when all the regulation, all the rules, all the stuff was turned on the church, and it went from a pure first century church, second century church, to a corrupted third century church, if you follow me. Now, Williams believed this as well. The moral principle in the scriptures ought to inform the civil magistrates, he believed. But he observed that well-ordered, just, and civil governments existed even where Christianity was not present. Thus, all governments had to maintain civil order and justice. And I would say, beloved, that lines up with Romans 13. But Williams decided that none had warrant to promote or repress any religion views. You can't force Christianity. Most of his contemporaries criticized his idea as prescription for chaos and anarchy, and the vast majority believe that each nation must have its national church and could require that the dissenters conform. And I agree with Williams on all these points. And then he later passed away and died a few years from this. And it's interesting that he was buried on his own property in the 1800s. His house fell in, and his grave was kind of lost. So then they erected a monument to him, which is this third picture over here. This was on his land. But listen, that is the life of Roger Williams, and you have been listening to, let's get our names straight, great men and women of faith, formerly heroes of the faith. And I want to thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow on all the preaching festivities. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. And I tell you, I see you tomorrow. It's Brother Donnie signing off. I hope you have a great day in the Lord, and we will talk to you soon. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.